The door creaks open. The lights flicker once, twice, and then go completely dark. Somewhere deep inside the house, something is breathing. And it has been waiting for you to come home. What you are about to hear is not just a ghost story. It is not just a haunted house tale. This is something older, something darker, something that does not follow the rules you think you know about death and what comes after it. So, before we begin, make sure you are somewhere comfortable. Make sure the lights are on, and whatever you do not listen to this alone in the dark. Because once this story starts, it does not stop, and neither will the feeling that something is standing right behind you. Welcome to Dark Hour Archives, the channel where we bring you the stories that were never meant to be told. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we drop horror content that will genuinely keep you up at night. And if you enjoy what you are about to hear, go ahead and like this video before we even get started, because trust me, by the end, your hands might be too shaky to press anything. All right. The lights are low. The story is ready. Let us begin. The house at the end of Callaway Road had been empty for 11 years. Nobody in the small town of Harwick, Pennsylvania wanted to talk about why. The locals would change the subject if you brought it up at the diner. The real estate agent who had the listing had quietly removed it from every website and stopped returning calls about it. Children who grew up in Harwick knew two things by the time they were old enough to ride bikes alone: stay away from Miller's Creek after dark, and never, under any circumstances, go near the house at the end of Callaway Road. The house had a name, though nobody used it out loud. They just called it what it was: the House of Dead. It started, as so many terrible things do, with a family who did not know the history. The Callaway family themselves had built the house in 1887, a sprawling Victorian structure with high ceilings and dark wood paneling, and more rooms than any single family could reasonably need. It had been beautiful once. Photographs from the turn of the century show a grand home surrounded by well-kept gardens, a wide front porch, and tall windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole structure seem almost warm, almost alive. But that was before 1943, before what the locals simply called the incident, and before the house decided it was done letting people leave. The Hargrove family, David, his wife Claire, their teenage daughter Mara, and their 10-year-old son Owen, arrived in Harwick on a Thursday afternoon in late October. They had driven 14 hours from Chicago, their SUV packed with boxes and furniture strapped to a rented trailer. David had taken a job at the county hospital as a surgeon, a significant pay bump from his city position, and Claire had been ready for a change. The housing market in Harwick was absurdly affordable by Chicago standards. When the real estate company had sent them the listing, a 6-bedroom Victorian on a large lot, priced at less than their Chicago apartment, Claire had called it a miracle. She had no way of knowing that miracles and this house had never had anything to do with each other. The first thing Mara noticed when they pulled into the driveway was the smell. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Something sweet and wrong underneath the smell of old wood and autumn leaves, like flowers left too long in a vase of stagnant water. She mentioned it to her mother, who laughed it off and said old houses always smelled a little musty. Her father said they would air it out in a day or two. Her little brother Owen did not say anything about the smell at all. He was staring at the upstairs window, the one at the far right corner of the second floor, with an expression on his face that Mara could not quite read. When she asked him what he was looking at, he turned to her slowly and said, very quietly, that the lady in the window wanted them to come inside. Mara looked up at the window. It was empty. She told Owen to stop trying to be creepy. He did not smile the way he usually would have. He just turned back to the window and nodded, as if someone up there had just said something to him. The first night passed without incident, mostly. The family ate takeout pizza on the kitchen floor, surrounded by boxes, and David made everyone laugh with his terrible impression of a Victorian butler welcoming them to their new home. Claire found an old fireplace in the main sitting room that actually worked, and they sat around it for an hour after dinner, feeling, for the first time in months, like things might actually be okay. Mara went to bed around 11, exhausted from the drive. She fell asleep quickly, which surprised her. The house should have felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Instead, she felt strangely heavy, like something was pressing her down into the mattress, and sleep came like a wave she had no choice but to go under. She dreamed of a woman, in a white dress, standing at the foot of her bed. The woman was not threatening in the dream, she was just standing there, watching, her head tilted slightly to one side the way a person does when they are listening to something far away. Her face was pale, and her eyes were the color of old smoke, gray and flat and wrong. She did not speak in the dream, she just watched. And when Mara woke up at 3 in the morning, heart slamming in her chest for no reason she could name, the first thing she did was look at the foot of her bed. The room was empty. But there was a smell in the air. Sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in water. The second day, things started to shift. Owen woke up before anyone else and was found sitting at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. When Claire came downstairs and asked what he was drawing, he held up the paper. It was a house, their house, recognizable in every detail, with all its Victorian peaks and wide windows. But in every single window, Owen had drawn a face. Not cartoon faces, detailed, realistic faces with hollow eyes and open mouths, pressed against the glass from the inside as if trying to get out. Claire stared at the drawing for a long moment, then gently asked Owen who taught him to draw like that. Owen said no one. He said the lady showed him what to draw. She told him it was important that people know the faces were still there. Claire took the drawing, folded it, and put it in the trash. She told herself it was just a child's imagination. But she did not look at the upstairs windows for the rest of the morning. David noticed something that afternoon that he did not mention to Claire until much later. He had been in the basement, a large, stone-walled space that ran the full length of the house, looking for the circuit breaker panel when he found the door. It was set into the far wall, partially hidden behind a shelving unit that had clearly been placed in front of it deliberately. The door was small, barely 5 feet tall, made of wood so dark it was almost black, with no handle on the outside, just a small iron keyhole and a set of deep scratches in the wood around it, the kind of scratches that are made by fingernails. The kind of scratches made by someone on the wrong side of the door, trying to get out. David stood in front of that door for a long time. He told himself the scratches were from an animal. He pushed the shelving unit back in front of it and went upstairs and did not think about it again. Until he had to. Nobody had told the Hargroves any of this, of course. Nobody in Harwick had warned them. And in the days after they moved in, as the unpacking continued and the boxes slowly disappeared, and the house began to look more like a home, the small wrongnesses accumulated so gradually that each one, taken alone, seemed dismissible. The way the temperature in certain hallways dropped noticeably even when all the windows were closed. The way sound moved strangely in the house. A conversation in the kitchen was inaudible from the living room, but a whisper in the basement could be heard with disturbing clarity in the upstairs hallway. The way that every mirror in the house, and there were many of them, ornate Victorian mirrors that the previous owners had left behind, seemed to reflect light slightly wrong, not dim exactly, but muted, as if the reflections were operating under a different set of physical rules than the rooms themselves. David noticed the mirror thing first and mentioned it to Claire, who looked at the hallway mirror for a long time and then said she thought it was just the age of the glass. Old glass was wavy, impure, it reflected differently. David nodded and agreed, and did not say what he was actually thinking. which was that the wrongness in the reflections was not about the quality of the glass. It was about what the glass seemed to be reflecting when nothing was there to cast a reflection. That night, Claire woke at 2:47 in the morning. She remembered the time exactly because she checked her phone, to the sound of someone walking in the hallway outside their bedroom. Slow, deliberate footsteps, not the random creaking of an old house settling. Purposeful steps, moving from one end of the hallway to the other, pausing, then moving back. She lay still for a full minute, listening, telling herself it was David getting up for water or Mara going to the bathroom. Then she reached over and felt David warm and deeply asleep beside her. She got up. She checked the hallway. It was empty. She checked on both kids, both asleep in their rooms. She stood in the hallway for a long moment in the dark and listened, and the house was completely, absolutely silent around her. The kind of silence that does not feel like absence, the kind that feels like held breath. By the end of the first week, the pattern had established itself. Strange sounds in the night, footsteps, murmuring. Something that sounded like a music box playing just at the edge of hearing. Owen continuing to have long, quiet conversations with someone no one else could see. Always referring to her as the lady, describing her in consistent detail, the white dress, the gray eyes, the way she tilted her head when she listened. Mara having the same dream every night about the woman at the foot of her bed, except each night the woman was a little closer than the night before. And David, who was by nature a rational and skeptical man, finding himself unable to go back to the basement, unable to stop thinking about the small dark door and the scratches in the wood, and unable to shake the feeling. Completely irrational, he told himself, completely without basis, that something behind that door knew he had found it, and was glad. Claire, for her part, had started noticing things she did not share with David because she did not want to frighten him, and she did not want to say the words out loud because saying them would make them real. She had started finding things moved. Small things, a coffee mug left on the right side of the counter, found on the left, a book she had set spine up to mark her page, found closed and neatly placed on a different shelf. A photograph of the family she had propped up on the mantelpiece above the sitting room fireplace, found one morning face down on the floor, unbroken, as if it had been carefully placed there rather than fallen. She righted the photograph each time. Each morning it was face down again. She stopped putting it back up. She told herself it was the vibration of traffic, the settling of old floorboards, the wind finding gaps in old window seals. She told herself these things with the particular determination of a woman who needs very badly for an explanation to be true. Owen had stopped mentioning the lady by the end of the week. Not because the conversations had stopped. Claire could still sometimes hear his end of them, one-sided murmuring from his room at odd hours, but because he had clearly sensed that talking about it made the adults in his life tense and unhappy. So he went quiet about it the way children do when they learn that some truths are unwelcome. He drew instead page after page of detailed drawings that Claire would find folded under his pillow or tucked into the back of his dresser drawer. Always the house. Always the faces in the windows. And now, in the newer drawings, a figure on the front porch. A woman in a white dress with gray eyes, her head tilted to one side, one hand raised in what might have been a wave and might have been something else entirely. Owen drew her with the kind of careful, loving detail that a child reserves for someone they care about. That was perhaps the most frightening thing of all. The breakthrough, or rather the breakdown, came on the 9th night. David had been researching the house online, half-heartedly at first, then with increasing urgency as the details accumulated. He found an archived local newspaper article from 1943, digitized and uploaded by the Harwick Historical Society, that described what had happened in the house. A family named Voss had lived there, Heinrich Voss, his wife Elsa, and their 4 children. Heinrich Voss had been, by all accounts, a deeply disturbed man who had become convinced that the house was inhabited by protective spirits, that the dead who had passed within its walls remained there, bound to the structure, and that they required acknowledgement, ritual, and in his increasingly fractured belief system, sacrifice. The article was careful and clinical in its language, the way newspaper writing of that era often was when dealing with things too terrible to describe plainly. But between the careful lines, the story was clear. Heinrich Voss had locked his family inside the house in November of 1943. He had blocked every door and window, and whatever happened inside those walls over the following 3 days had left Elsa and all 4 children dead, and Heinrich himself found sitting calmly in the main sitting room, the same room where the Hargrove family had sat around the fireplace on their first night, with no memory of anything that had occurred, repeating one phrase over and over in a voice the responding officers described as not quite his own. He kept saying, "The house needs to be fed. The house needs to be fed." David read that article 3 times. Then he closed his laptop, went upstairs, woke Claire, and told her everything. The article, the basement door, the scratches, all of it. Claire sat in silence for a long time after he finished. Then, she said, they needed to leave. "First thing in the morning," she said. "Pack what we need tonight, leave tomorrow at dawn." David agreed. They were completely aligned for the first time since arriving in Harwich. They went to wake the kids. Mara was not in her room. What followed was 45 minutes that Claire would later describe as the most terrifying of her life, and she had grown up in a difficult household and worked as a trauma counselor for 8 years. She and David searched every room on the second floor, then the first, calling Mara's name, trying to keep their voices calm for Owen's sake as he trailed behind them in his pajamas, holding his mother's hand, saying nothing. They checked every closet, the attic pull-down stairs, the garage. No Mara. David was on the phone with 911 when Claire, standing in the kitchen, heard something. Faint, muffled, coming from below, from the basement. She grabbed a flashlight and went down the stairs before David could stop her. Mara was in the basement, standing in front of the shelving unit that David had pushed back over the small dark door. She was standing completely still, her arms at her sides, her back to her mother, her face inches from the wooden shelves. She was not asleep. Claire could tell by her posture that her eyes were open, but she was not responding to her name, not responding to Claire grabbing her shoulder. It was only when Claire physically stepped between Mara and the shelves, blocking her line of sight to the door behind them, that Mara blinked, drew a sharp breath, and seemed to return to herself like someone surfacing from deep water. She had no memory of leaving her bed. She had no memory of coming to the basement. The last thing she remembered was the woman at the foot of her bed, closer than ever before, reaching out a gray hand and whispering something that Mara could not quite hear, no matter how hard she strained to listen in the dream. They left before dawn. Not at first light, before it. At 4 in the morning, with whatever they could grab in 20 minutes, they loaded into the SUV and pulled out of the driveway on Callaway Road, and none of them looked back at the house. Or at least that is what they all told themselves. But Owen, buckled into the back seat, turned to look at the house as they drove away. And later, months later, in therapy, in a new city, in a house with no history and no secrets, he would tell his therapist that as they drove away, every single window in the house was lit up. Not with electric light, with something warmer and older and wronger than that. And in every window, there were faces, pressed against the glass, watching them go. And the lady in the white dress was standing on the front porch, her gray eyes tracking the car down the road, her head tilted to one side, listening to something far away. And she was smiling because they might be leaving. But she had learned something important about them now. She knew their faces. She knew their names. And houses like that one are very, very patient. They left before dawn. Not at first light, before it. At 4 in the morning, with whatever they could grab in 20 minutes, they loaded into the SUV and pulled out of the driveway on Callaway Road, and none of them looked back at the house. Or at least that is what they all told themselves. But Owen, buckled into the back seat, turned to look at the house as they drove away. And later, months later, in therapy, in a new city, in a house with no history and no secrets, he would tell his therapist that as they drove away, every single window in the house was lit up. Not with electric light, with something warmer and older and wronger than that. And in every window there were faces, pressed against the glass, watching them go. And the lady in the white dress was standing on the front porch, her gray eyes tracking the car down the road, her head tilted to one side, listening to something far away. And she was smiling. Because they might be leaving. But she had learned something important about them now. She knew their faces. She knew their names. And houses like that one are very, very patient. The Hargrove family spent the first 3 months after leaving in a hotel in Pittsburgh. David had to deal with the broken contract, the financial consequences, the professional embarrassment of explaining to colleagues why he had walked away from a position he had fought hard to land. Claire threw herself into finding them a new home in a new city. Somewhere with no Victorian architecture. Somewhere new and bright and thoroughly modern with no history older than a decade. She researched every house they looked at, ran title searches, dug into previous ownership. She did not tell the real estate agents why she was asking so many questions about prior occupants. She just asked, and she listened carefully to the answers, and she walked away from 2 houses that seemed perfectly fine on paper, because something, she could never say exactly what, felt wrong the moment she stepped through the door. She trusted that feeling now. She had earned the right to trust it. Mara was the one who struggled most in the aftermath. The dreams did not stop immediately when they left the house. For nearly 2 months, the woman in the white dress still came to the foot of her bed each night, a little closer each time, that gray hand reaching out, that whisper just below hearing. Mara slept with every light in her room on, and her door open, and she called out to her parents on the nights when it got bad, which was most nights. The therapist they found for her was good and patient, and did not dismiss anything Mara told her. She said the dreams were a trauma response, a way the mind processed fear, that they would fade, and slowly, they did. But Mara, who is now 19 and away at college, still cannot go into a house that smells like flowers left too long in water, without her heart doing something terrible in her chest, and her feet carrying her back out the door before she has consciously decided to leave. Owen was the one who recovered fastest, at least on the surface. Children are resilient in ways that can seem alarming from the outside. Within a few weeks of leaving, he was back to his normal self, or something that looked like his normal self. He stopped drawing faces in windows. He stopped talking about the lady. He laughed at cartoons and complained about school and asked for specific cereals at the grocery store. But he kept every drawing he had ever made of the house. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed, and he never showed them to anyone, and he never threw them away. When his mother found them years later while helping him pack for college, she held the box for a long time without opening it. Then she put it back exactly where she had found it and never mentioned it to him. Some things, she had learned, you left alone. The Hargrove family never went back to Harwick. David broke his hospital contract and paid the penalty. The house was relisted once, 18 months later, sold to a property investment firm that planned to convert it into rental units. The contractors they sent to begin renovations quit on the second day and refused to say exactly why, except that they would not be returning and no amount of money was worth it. The investment firm eventually wrote the property off as a loss. The house at the end of Callaway Road sits empty still. The gardens have gone wild. The paint is peeling in long gray strips. The front porch is rotting, but the windows are intact. Every single one of them. And if you drove past on a winter night when the road was empty and the sky was that particular shade of deep black that only happens in small towns far from city lights, and if you made the mistake of slowing down and looking up at those windows, you might see something. A shape. A face, perhaps, or the suggestion of one. Something pale, pressed close to the glass. Watching. Waiting. Because the house at the end of Callaway Road is not abandoned. It is not empty. It is full. It has always been full. It just does not always show you what it is full of. Not until it is ready. Not until it has decided that it wants you inside. There is one more thing about this story, one detail that did not make it into the newspaper archives, that was not in the Historical Society records, that came instead from an old woman in Harwick named Doris Fenn, who had lived on Callaway Road her entire life, and who told this story to a researcher from Dark Hour Archives 2 years ago, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she never touched, speaking in a voice so quiet the recorder barely caught it. Doris said that the Voss family, the ones from 1943, the ones Heinrich had locked inside, had not all died. One of the children had survived. A girl, 7 years old at the time. She had been found in the basement when police finally broke down the door, sitting in front of a small door set into the stone wall, humming quietly to herself, completely unharmed in any physical sense. They placed her with a family in a neighboring county. She never spoke about what had happened inside the house. She grew up, married, had children of her own, lived a long life by all external measures. But Doris, who had known the woman in her later years, said there was always something slightly wrong about her eyes. Something flat and gray and not quite present. Like she was always listening to something far away. And the woman had told Doris once, near the end of her life, that she was not afraid of dying. She said she had known since she was 7 years old exactly where she was going when she died. She said she was going home. That is the story of the House of Dead. A house that does not let go. A house that collects. A house that is still out there, right now, at the end of a road in a small Pennsylvania town, windows intact, patient as stone, waiting for the next family who does not know the history and sees only the price and the square footage and the beautiful bones of a Victorian structure in need of some love, and somewhere inside it, in the walls, in the floors, behind the small dark door in the basement, all the people it has ever held are still there. Still waiting, still watching, still, in some terrible way that the living cannot fully comprehend, still home. That is everything we have for you tonight here at Dark Hour Archives. If this story got under your skin, and we genuinely hope it did, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us the part that scared you most. Was it the scratches on the door? Owen talking to someone no one else could see? Or was it that final detail about the girl with the flat gray eyes? Let us know, because we read every single comment, and this community's reactions are honestly one of the best parts of making this content. And if you want to help this channel grow so we can keep bringing you stories like this one, please share this video. Send it to someone who loves horror. Post it somewhere. It genuinely makes a difference, and it means the world to us. Subscribe if you have not already, hit the notification bell, and we will see you next time, when the lights go down and the next story begins. Sleep well, if you can.